Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're enjoying this conference as much as I am. We've had inspiring talks, fun talks, funny talks, and now this is the poignant talk. Yes, you'll shed tears in this talk, but I'm afraid I asked the conference organizers if with every ticket they could provide an onion so that you could have actual tears. I'm afraid that's not possible. So this will just be a look back to Why the Lucky Stiff's legacy. This title may not make much sense if you don't know what Why the Lucky Stiff is. It's actually a person, but I'll go back to that. First off, this is Sunny. This is me. That's my name. It's also an adjective, I know. But that's my first name. I'm a Ruby developer. I've been doing Ruby for over 13 years. And when I discovered Ruby, I discovered a fantastic language. It was amazing. And I first tried it on this website at the time called Try Ruby. And it was an interactive tutorial. You could actually type Ruby and get it instantly back. And at the time, I thought that was crazy. I mean, that was not JavaScript. I mean, where was the code running? And what about the security implications behind all of that? I was mind blown by both Ruby that I was learning and by this website. I felt like I was entering into a new kind of age in my programming career. And another resource I used and I learned from was this guide. This is called Why's Poignant Guide to Ruby. It's a free online PDF. It's got, as you can see, cartoons in it, and those cartoons are actually a bit meta. They talk back to you, and next to the cartoons there are stories and a lot of things that have nothing to do with Ruby, like pet hams and elves and all kinds of weird things. And actual Ruby code. So I was learning actual Ruby code and also having fun. It was quirky, it was weird, and that's how I learned Ruby. And I associated the two. Ruby had this book, this weird book, and page after page, after the first few examples, I went on to more advanced examples where you could use Ruby metaprogramming, which was also mind-blowing. And those two projects, both Try Ruby and the guide, were made by this person called Why the Lucky Stiff, or Y for short. This is him at a 2006 RailsConf talking about the sandbox that powers Try Ruby. But Y didn't stop at those two very important projects. He had a few more, like a gem to generate HTML just from Ruby in some weird way, which was amazing. Some parsers for textile, for YAML, GUI application in very simple DSL, a programming environment for kids, a micro framework, web framework in less than 4Ks, an HTML parser. He actually did another language inspired from Ruby and other languages, and all kinds of just lots of weird projects and great projects. And once you started to pull the thread of all Y did, there was a lot of creative things and a lot of very strong, powerful libraries that a lot of Rubyists were using. And at the time, he was a key figure in the community. He came to well, he did a few on-stage performances, sometimes even with a band. And at the time, if you knew about maths and DHH, you probably knew about Y. And suddenly, on the 19th of August 2009, he disappeared. Silence. What happened is he committed info-suicide, which means that his website, his Twitter account, his blogs, all his projects, his GitHub open source projects were all torn down and disappeared in one day, with no explanation. I can start to see the tears in your eyes. That's very good. So the first question we asked was, is he okay? I mean, we all loved the character and all he did, so is he okay? But then, wait, who is he? And actually, that's when I realized, it was commonly known, but I just realized at that time that he was only known by his nickname. Nobody knew his real identity. And so we knew him as Why the Lucky Stiff, or Why, and he had publicly appeared, but he went to great lengths into hiding his identity. He wanted the two to be really separated from each other. A few months before he disappeared, he was outed. There's a small blog that came up and trying to trace who he was by putting in his IP address and linking emails and putting actual very personal details about his life online, like photos of his spouse, etc. And much against his will. So maybe that's part of the reason why he committed info-suicide. But at least we knew from friends, from people who knew him or his employers, that he was okay. He just did not want to be contacted anymore. He was fine. So knowing that, of course, ironically, the other question is why? Why would he do that? And what we felt at the time was shock. We'd lost a friend, a very important figure in the community, and so we were sad. But some people were also angry and thinking, how dare he? I mean, all those open source projects, those are dependencies on my app. How could he just tear down everything? Why? Four years later, suddenly, out of nowhere, appeared this final burst of a project by Y. This is a printout by Steve Klabnik, who took the few pages, printing instructions that came up on Why the Lucky Stiff's website. It's a strange project, much in the way of Y's art. And Steve Klabnik called it Closure, and it's interesting to read, mostly interesting if you know a bit about why, but it talks about being anonymous, about erasing your identity. There's clues to that about your work, also about the pains of programming, about how hard it can be sometimes. And that's the last piece of art that Y had. That's the end of the poignant part. You can wipe your tears. So it's been 10 years since he disappeared. 10 years. And just to get an idea of how much we remember Y, can I just get a show of hands of who knows about Y before I talked about him, obviously? Okay, I'd say half, approximately, of people here. And when I talked about Y around me, with my colleagues, and I was amazed that you don't know about Y. I mean, this Y was everything to me when I discovered Ruby, and he was very important. How could he have disappeared? How could he have disappeared from everybody's mind? And what has he left behind? When he disappeared, all his projects were open source and on Git, so people had the code, had the history, and could start piecing the history back and putting them up again on GitHub and other places. And and then try to share the maintenance of all these projects. And it was actually a big project because there were lots of libraries, lots of Ruby libraries and other projects in other languages, and some very small and some larger. And today, looking back, if you look at all those projects, most are still there, but have been kept as is, as a kind of remembrance of what Y did. So those projects are sometimes very interesting to look at, because inside there's some funky ways to use metaprogramming or some very smart ways to look around at a problem. Some other projects were actively maintained. That's Hackety Hack, which is a programming environment for kids, is one of the projects that has been so well maintained, but it's an example using shoes. It was an environment for kids, and shoes is just a very simple DSL to make GUI applications on Windows, Mac, Linux, and it's really good, and it's actively maintained. But today, the code of shoes has nothing to do with the code of shoes at the time. The ideas are still there, but the code has completely changed. After 10 years, it's a normal thing, it's a normal process, and it's actually a living project that continues to live. So it may not look like much is left from Y. However, there are a lot of projects that have been inspired by his work. This is an example code is maybe not very important, but it's an example from his Ripert, the HTML parser. And it's got some things that blew our minds at the time. I mean, you could take a document and use the slash as a divider against a string to search in text, or even divide by a range of strings. And those concepts were possible with Ruby. They were just not applied before to a HTML parser. And some of his ideas have gone into other very famous libraries. It inspired Nokogiri, it inspired Sinatra, it inspired a lot of projects and DSLs that we're using today. He was using Ruby in those creative ways and making real tools out of it. Turns out that Y was an explorer. He helped push the boundaries of what was possible, using his creativity to try different techniques, to find new paths. And on the other hand, as an explorer, his thing was not to make projects that were made to last, and it may not be his thing to have a common style. All his projects have different style in the way they are created. The Ruby isn't the same. He changes constantly in a search for something new. And another thing he left behind is people like me who learned from Y. Yeah, that's me, little baby, learning about class self. And I realized that with Y, thanks to Y, that programming didn't have to be boring enterprise solutions. It can be easy, it can be fun, it can be creative, it can be silly. That's what programming is. We have this saying in the Ruby community, which is, maths is nice, and so are we, abbreviated as -1. And I'd like to suggest an extra acronym that we can add to define ourselves in the community. It's very simple. It's Wewamkegams. I'll have to work on that, but what I mean by that is that Y has shaped the idea that Ruby was special. There's no other programming language where there's a Y. this very peculiar persona, appeared in the world of Ruby. And in the same way, Ruby is very unique. Can be weird, can be quirky. It was the outlier at the time when I was learning programming. That's one of Y's tweets. When you don't create things, you become defined by your tastes rather than your ability. Your tastes only narrow and exclude people, so create. One of the major lessons that he gave me is to create, to be creative. Maybe not as creative and going everywhere, all over the place, like he did. But we can all be creative in our own way. There's boundaries that we don't push yet that we could. Maybe there's some things we haven't tried, or some extra paths we haven't taken yet. And he's also taught me that this doesn't, what you create, when you go on a path to explore, it doesn't have to last. You can't throw away everything. If you're doing open source, it's better if you continue maintaining your project, but you don't have to. You don't owe the people using your open source software anything. That's also the beauty of open source. They can do their thing with your software. It's okay to just do things and leave them as they are. Also, you don't have to be known. You don't have to. It doesn't have to be your day job to do creative things. You can stay anonymous. That was Y's decision, and it's in a way it was important for him in his creative process to completely separate the two. Doesn't have to be, but you can if you want. And your next project may not have anything to do with your day-to-day job, or the ideas behind your next project can be creative in ways that you haven't yet imagined. And that's what Y taught me. More importantly, above all that, the lesson is that you can have fun. And you should have fun. And in his keynote, Matt said that the reason he created Ruby was just for fun. If we stop thinking about fun, we may never do the next project. We may never be creative enough to think that we could do something else that hasn't been done before and iterate over that. So I'd encourage all of us to find the times where we can have fun. And of course, if we're doing Ruby, it's also because we're having fun doing Ruby. We enjoy it. We find what's beautiful in Ruby and use it in our own way and enjoy discovering new libraries that use it in creative ways. All that is to have fun. And Y was having fun. I'd like to thank Y, wherever he is. Apparently he's okay, we haven't heard, but his identity this other identity in the real world, Jonathan, that's his name. Hope he's okay. And I'd like to thank Y also the persona, the crazy persona, this mad scientist, genius, journalist, and freelance artist. Because thanks to him, I'm here, and thanks to him, a lot of this, what makes Ruby special, is also here. And also, thank you. I won't be taking any questions, but please come speak to me. I'll be there in the evening, and I'd love to hear your story or whatever topic you're fond of. Thank you again.
Thank you so much.